So today we are going to do our last session, and we're going to just start practices to support all learners, universal design for learning. And I am Alana, and Nikki and Katie will be joining as well. So we're all kind of tag teaming this. So if you have not heard of us, we are the IEPTA Center. We're a state-funded technical assistance center through the Indiana Department of Education. We're supported by Indiana State University. So we are technically members of them too. That's where we work. We work to increase knowledge, skills, and capacity of Indiana educators to improve outcomes for students with disabilities, because we know that we improve outcomes for all students when we do that. We believe in promoting education with a shared responsibility and access to a strong core curriculum and high quality instruction that benefits all students. So we all work for the IEPTA Center. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself if you don't know me, and then I'm going to let Nikki and Katie as well. This is an older picture of my kids, but because my son is going to be 13 in a couple of weeks. So, but these are my kids. I am a Hoosier. I went to IU Bloomington for my undergrad, and actually just got done with my Director of Exceptional Learning license from IU Bloomington. And that's my last degree that I'm going to get. So I started there and ended there, and that's very helpful for me. I love to travel. I do work for ISU now, and I work for IEPTA, but my background is special education. So I was in a classroom for 18 years, and then I was a coordinator, an IEP facilitator, before jumping over to the IEPTA Center and supporting teachers that way. So I am a special educator with Nikki and Katie. They are my general educator counterparts with this training today.
All right, and my name's Katie. I, like Alana, was in the classroom for 18 years before I joined the center, but I taught middle school English. I was a gen ed teacher, and I taught some 5 through 8 English classes. So those were always fun and challenging. But this is just a little bit about me. This picture, like Alana, this picture is also a little bit older. This was actually 2020, so right before things kind of went crazy with COVID. But this is one of the most fun pictures that I have with the family. And I'm so excited. We got one home from college on Monday night. The other one comes home tonight. And our son, who moved to Salt Lake City in January, flew home today. So we are just super excited in our house. But I bleed ISU blue. I have, that's where all of my education has been. And now I work for them, and I love it. So I love all things Harry Potter and everything related to the beach, and I'm excited to be on here today.
All right, and that brings you all to me. I am Nikki. I, like my counterparts, I love to travel. I really love to read, and I wasn't sure how much I'd love to read educational research until my 15 years in the classroom turned into some time in higher ed and departments of education, and reading the research and learning about what research could have, what kind of impact research could have on the classroom practice of teachers. So I do have that gen ed background, but also just love reading all the things research to help improve outcomes for kids. You'll meet my family there on the right side. We were so excited last year to be able to visit the White House. And I'm probably going to find that that photo is old after a few years as well, because it'll be hard to change it after such a fun visit. So we're so glad that you all are here today and that you've gotten to know us a little bit. We know that building that foundation of trust and that relationship is so important to the work that we do in classrooms and universal design for learning. I'm going to turn it back over to Alana.
Yep, that's why we kind of go through this to make sure that we have some connections to you. You know, some of you probably went to IU or ISU, like to travel as well. So just making sure that we feel that community with that. So our learning objectives today is we're going to define and discuss UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, and how it can work in your classroom. We're going to look at the learning objectives and think about ways to apply UDL practices to them. So we're going to look at learning objectives and thinking about, when you take it back to your classroom, what are your learning objectives and how can we apply UDL to them as you're planning for next year in the summer, or thinking about wrapping up the end of this year. We're going to hopefully give you some strategies that you can apply them to the classroom. We do have a Padlet if you want to use it. Sometimes you just have your phone and you can scan it over that QR code, or you could put that right directly into your computer. We have our slides, we have resources, we have some books linked. So anything that you may need is in our Padlet. It never goes away. We update it as we find different resources that are useful. So just keeping that in your back pocket is helpful for you, or you can share it with friends as well. Thank you, Nikki. You put it in the chat. Appreciate that. So for this first activity, we're thinking about how you like to learn new information. So if you want to use a chat, you can use a chat, and we're just going to talk this out, and I'm going to talk about maybe my ways, and Nikki and Katie can jump in. But how do you like to learn new information? When you study for a test, do you like quiet or background noise? Does your learning style change depending on the task or day? And our learning preference are like fingerprints. What do you think that means? So when we're thinking out these questions, they could all have different answers depending on the day, right? So if you are learning new information, you know yourself. If it's something hard, you might not want to have anything else in the background. You might need to really concentrate. You might have to write notes. So if you're sitting and listening to this webinar and this is new information for you, some of you would have to write notes as you're going. Some of you might prefer just to listen to the information and hear it over and over again, or rewind parts or things like that. But knowing how you learn best is really helpful to learn how your students learn best. And thinking about when I do work or something like that, do I want quiet or do I like noise in the background? These questions are very helpful to see what your learning preference is. And so I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about that. And even Nikki and Katie, if you want to join, answer any of these questions, thinking about how you learn, and we can talk about, we all learn a little bit differently, and we can kind of see that through these questions. So I'm going to give you a second. All right, so Katie did say she thinks it depends on the task. And Nikki, I have no problem listening for fun podcasts or audiobooks, but when it comes to research or webinars, just listening is not enough. That's kind of how I feel too. I can listen to anything in a car that's fun, like you said. If I have to remember something, I have to write the notes down. I can throw them away right after the lecture. I can throw them away right after the PD. Like I just need to have that for my brain to sink that information in. So that is really good to know what kind of a learner that you are. Katie said, if it's math, I need to hear it, see it, do it. That's kind of me too. Math is not my strong subject either. If it's related to literature, you could teach it yourself. So you know your strengths, and then having these kind of questions to give your students is very helpful for an interest inventory for your kids. So your students would be able to give you this information as a teacher. So maybe it's the first couple of weeks of school, you want them to learn, to tell you how they learn. They might not even know. They might not have ever thought about these questions. So giving these prompts is very helpful for teachers, that they can take that information and use it in their class. So if the kids are taking a test or if they're studying, you know that these certain students probably do better when they study by themselves. These students probably would like to work with each other to study. So those are kinds of things that you could use as a teacher to get that information from your students and to help you guide their learning and to help them know what their learning preference is, because the quicker they know, the better. When they get to college or high school or trade school, if they know how they learn new information and if they think that out, that's going to help them gain new information in the way that they want to learn that. So these are some good prompts I think that you could use to get to know your students. I'm gonna say for next year, for planning in August or in July and August, and talk these questions out with students and talk about learning preferences. We are like fingerprints. All of us are different. No two fingerprints are the same. Nikki, Katie, and I have similar experiences in that we went to graduate school, or we have a higher degree, or things like that. But Nikki, Katie, and I are all different learners. We all learn differently. We all learn different tasks differently, and we all have to study differently. So we are like fingerprints. None of us are the same. It doesn't matter if you have 27 students in your classroom, you're going to have 27 different learning preferences in that classroom. So just talking about that, I think, is very helpful to you as a teacher. Thanks, Nick. We can go on to the next. So we're going to watch a video by Dr. Shelley Moore. It's called Reducing the Barriers, Planning for All. These are really quick 5 to 6 minute YouTube videos that you can look up and see. I'm gonna take a second and we're gonna listen to Dr. Shelley.
Franklin University makes it possible. Time has come, make a break.
5 more minutes. Useful videos in about 5 minutes that support the teaching and learning of all students. I'm your host, Shelley Moore, and today's episode is called Reducing the Barriers, Planning for All. Okay, everyone, today we're talking about something very important. Today we're talking about shifting a paradigm. Now, one thing that I'm not sure everybody realizes is that in our efforts to move towards more inclusion and equity in our schools is that one of the biggest barriers is the actual infrastructure of the existing educational model. You see, me, like many of us who work in education, we were taught how to support students through a special education lens. That is, a model where a plan is made for most students and then special support is offered to those students who don't have success in that original plan. This special support then seeks to figure out, well, what's wrong with the student in question, and then offers support in a way by offering adaptations and modifications so that they can fit into the first plan. But what if nobody fits into the plan? Because of how we were all taught to support students, as our classrooms have become more diverse, there's been this overwhelming feeling that inclusion is so much work because more and more students need this type of retrofit support in order to be successful. Okay, now listen, I have never met a teacher that can follow more than one plan. So a big question emerging here is, how do we make one plan for all learners from the start so that we can be effective and efficient and then not have to retrofit for all of the learners that don't fit? In order to do this, we need to shift how we think about and respond to students who are struggling. You see, special education evolved out of a medical model. So for example, like if you break your leg, you go to the doctor and then they fix you. And if they can't fix you, they send you to a specialist. We get medical attention when something is wrong. This is special education. It's designed to react to students when something is wrong. And as a result, our educational system has become so heavily reliant on processes that emphasize failure, expensive evaluations, and intervention systems that focus on the deficits in students. Well, something that we can learn from the disability community is that just because a person is struggling doesn't mean they're broken. People don't need to be fixed. So then how do we respond to students in a way that meets their needs without creating programs and following processes for only targets what's wrong? Well, I will tell you this. We need to move away from the medical model, that's for sure. So what can we do instead? Well, one alternative is to shift towards a social model. In a social model, if someone isn't having success, it's not because they have a disability or because something's wrong with them as an individual, but instead it's because there's something around them in the context that's limiting their success. Now listen, I spend a lot of time traveling, mostly throughout North America, and about 2 years ago I had the opportunity to speak at a conference in Hong Kong. Now I was so excited about this. I've never been to Hong Kong, so my wife and I, we packed our bags and we were ready to go on our great Hong Kong adventure. Well, I was so excited that I didn't really anticipate that I would have different needs in Hong Kong than I do in North America. Typically, I would feel pretty independent in my travels. I would rent a car, I would drive, no problem. I would be able to navigate conversations and menus and directions and be able to find the conference hall that I'm presenting in, easy peasy. But in Hong Kong, I realized I needed much more support to be able to do these very similar things. Like I wasn't able to rent a car, I didn't have the right driver's license. I wasn't able to have many conversations, read menus, or follow directions because there was a language barrier. I also had no idea where I was speaking because I couldn't read any of the conference signs. I needed a lot of support in Hong Kong. Thank goodness the organization who brought me there anticipated this and made 3 Hong Kong EAs available to me if I needed them. I had a driver, I had a translator, I had a host. But I couldn't help think to myself, like, that's so many resources for one person. What's important to know about this example is that whether I'm in North America or whether I'm in Hong Kong, I'm still the same person. My success and independence in Hong Kong had very little to do with me as an individual and had more to do with the barriers that existed around me. Now, I want you to imagine all the students that you work with, every teacher they interact with, every classroom and school they go to. I want you to think about all these different contexts as possible different countries. Students are the same regardless of where they go. What changes is the context around them, and every context is going to have more or less barriers that can either support or limit success. So how do we support kids this way? Well, first of all, we have to anticipate these barriers, which means we can't wait for students to not be successful. We can't wait for them to fail. Second, we have to stop putting all of our resources into trying to fix individuals. If we move away from this kind of student diagnosis and intervention as the first strategy, it allows us to assess the environment and the context first to find out what's getting in the way. Because the big idea here is this, my friends. The more we support a context to reduce barriers, the less individual resources a person will need to be successful. The social model of support is a foundational understanding to planning for all students and directly connects to universal design for learning, response to instruction, and collaborative models of support. It would be very difficult to try and implement any of these frameworks if we were only looking at students through a medical and deficit-based perspective. Students are not broken. They may need support, but today's challenge is asking, instead, look around a student to see how can we fix the context so that barriers are reduced instead of looking at what we can do to fix the students in their deficit area. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of 5 More Minutes. Make sure you take a look at the 5 More Minutes podcast where we dig deeper into some of these big ideas. Give us a like. Don't forget to subscribe. You don't want to miss any of these episodes. I'll see you next time.
Thank you. So unpacking her, we're talking about reducing the barriers around, and specifically with our learning objectives in our classroom, with maybe flexible seating. We're going to talk about what universal design for learning is. It's a tier 1 support, so it really goes into general education. So this is not a special education initiative. Universal design for learning starts with general education. We all are different individuals. We all learn differently, as different as fingerprints, as I said. So that is all students, whether they receive IEP services or they don't. That's why we talk about this as a tier 1 support, and this should be in our general education classrooms and all throughout our schools. So we're going to move on to the next part. We're going to talk about what it means and how we can reduce those barriers. So this would be a little pre-test that I'd like to give you. If you are a teacher and you're new to Universal Design for Learning, we would read each goal in the table below and determine if it's a clear and if it allows for multiple means. So what does that mean? So I'm going to give you a model first. So students will be able to create a self-portrait. Is that a clear goal? Do I know what they're going to do by the time they leave my classroom today? Yes or no? And I'm going to say yes. The students will have to create a self-portrait. Is that a clear goal? Yes. I know what a self-portrait is. Maybe I'm the art teacher, or maybe it doesn't matter what class you're teaching, but this is what the students are going to do before they leave your class. Multiple means is, am I telling them how to do it? Or is there different ways that they can show their learning to me? So students will be able to create a self-portrait. Are there multiple means? Yes or no? I always like to look at the verbs and see if it's fixed or flexible. Well, create to me is flexible. It doesn't tell me how they're going to create it. It doesn't tell me what they're going to use to create that self-portrait. They just have to create a self-portrait. So I'm going to say yes, that is multiple means. Because if I'm thinking about this, yes, typically when you think about students are creating a self-portrait, they might be painting a self-portrait or drawing a self-portrait. But what if I gave them magazines and they cut out eyes that look like theirs, or a nose that looked like theirs, or a mouth that looked like theirs, and they had to put something together that looked like themselves? I didn't tell them they couldn't do that, right? There's not a fixed verb that tells them exactly how they're doing that. So if it has multiple means, that means that we can have some play with the universal design for learning. Our learning objectives are universally designed, and that's what I would use as a teacher to be able to show, they can show me what they know in the area that they know. There are some learning objectives that we have that are fixed, and that would be the second one. And I'm going to go with this one, and then we can reflect on the other two. But students will read Anne Frank, the diary of a young girl, and write a 5-page essay about the book. So again, I look at the verb. The verb is write. Is that fixed or flexible? Write, you have to write. That's the barrier. All the students have to write a 5-page essay about the book. So that is a fixed verb. So is it a clear goal? Do I know what they're going to do by the time they leave my class? Yes. They have to write a 5-page essay about the book. Is it multiple means? I'm going to say no, because that it says write a 5-page essay. Is there anywhere else in that goal that the students are able to show me what they know in the way that they want to show me? No, that's not multiple means. That's going to be not universally designed. Students will have to write that 5-page essay about that book. The barrier is some students might not want to write all of that. Maybe they can't. The skill is not, it depends on what your skill is. If you are working on writing, then you're going to have writing in your learning objective. But if the skill is that you just want to know if students know what the book was about, then you could change that to make it more universally designed and remove those barriers. And we're going to kind of talk about that. Nikki's going to talk about that a little bit later about what that would look like. But just thinking about your learning objectives, how do you post your learning objectives? Do they have fixed or flexible verbs? And if the verbs are fixed, can we make it flexible? Are we able to universally design that learning objectives for our students? And using this kind of checklist is a good way to think those out loud. So I'm going to keep going, and I'm just going to model what my thinking would be if it's a clear goal. If there's multiple, oh, you can go back, Nick. I'm sorry, the last two. And then we're going to go through the last two together. And then I'm going to pause and I'm going to let you think about this. But students will demonstrate their understanding of supply and demand by passing a multiple choice quiz. Is that a clear goal? By the time they leave my classroom, and what a clear goal is, do I know what they're going to do by the time they leave my classroom? They're going to, if I'm reading this learning objective, everybody's going to have to take the same multiple choice quiz about supply and demand. Is that a clear goal? Yes. I mean, I would put some measurement in there. We're not talking about goals right now, but, and then is it multiple means? Is there different ways that the students are able to show you what they know about supply and demand? That would be a no, right? Because multiple choice quiz, everybody has to take the same multiple choice quiz. They have to show me what they know through a multiple choice quiz. That's not multiple means. How could I change that? Well, maybe the students can tell me what supply and demand is. They can make a video of themselves talking about what supply and demand is, telling some sort of real world examples of what supply and demand is. The same kinds of things that I'm testing them on with the multiple choice, but they're going to show me what they know in their way. That would be how I would universally design for learning. If I'm giving everybody the same quiz over the same topic, the same way, that is not universally designed. And sometimes we can see how we can tweak that to make it for multiple students to access that curriculum in the way that they want to show us what they know. And Katie's going to talk about the pillars later. And then the last one is students will be able to measure the area of rectangles. Is that a clear goal? Do I know what they're going to do by the time they leave my classroom? Yes or no? Yes, I know that they have to measure the area of rectangles by the time they leave my classroom. Is it multiple means? I would say for this one, yes. It doesn't tell me that they have to write on a worksheet. They don't have to complete a worksheet. They can maybe go around the room and look for rectangles, furniture in the room, and they can measure it. I can bring different multiple rectangles in my classroom, manipulatives, and they can measure them. Or I can give them a worksheet and then they can figure that out on there. So it is multiple means because of the way that I wrote that one. They'll be able to measure the area of rectangles. How are they going to show me how they're going to do it? That the teacher gets to decide what that is. And you don't always have to use the same worksheet for all of these. So when you write University Design for Learning objectives, you use those flexible verbs so that students can have different ways that show you what they know. And we're going to go dive a little bit deeper into what that exactly looks like in the pillars and have a little bit more practice. But this is a pre-test. If you think that you kind of understand this part, this would be a good check. And then look at your learning objectives in your school or what you're going to be teaching, maybe the next unit, to see if they are university designed or if we can fix them and tweak them into making them more universally designed for learning for students. So Universal Design for Learning is a framework for instruction organized around the 3 principles based on learning sciences. So brain science. So this is based on research in brain science. These principles guide the design and development of curriculum that is effective and inclusive for all learners. So this is the definition from Meyer and Rose right here. It's a framework. You can't buy it. It's not a program that you buy, that you say, I need to buy some Universal Design for Learning. It is a framework of how we're teaching it. So it's strategies, It's based in science, and Katie's going to go on to talk about that science in the next few slides. Oh, after this, hold on, I have one more, sorry. So when you're thinking about this, and you guys could put this in the chat or think about it in your brain, whatever way you want to do it, but raise your hand or your virtual hand if your students strictly learn best by watching, by reading, by hearing information, or by doing. And if you said, hey, Alana, that doesn't make sense because it says strictly learn, and you said that everybody's different, so that we should all do different, we all have learning preferences. Sometimes, like Niki said, or I think Katie said, if it's for fun, I can hear it. If it's, and it's a different task and it's a little harder for me, I need to do something while I'm hearing it. I need to watch something while I'm doing. So nobody is strictly anything, right? So some people have to do different things depending on different tasks, and some people listen to new information and they have to do something at the same time. So sometimes our students change. They change on the day of the week. They change on if it's after lunch or in the morning. They change on if it's a harder task or not. So really, nobody learns strictly best by anything. It's kind of been debunked that we all have learning style, like that we have one way that we learn, but we do have learning preferences. So we do like to learn information in different ways, which is great to know, but it does change depending on our tasks. And now Katie's up.
All right, so let's just talk a little bit about universal design for learning, what it is, what the 3 pillars are, and what they look like, and what areas of the brain they really affect. So like Alana said, universal design for learning is based on what we know about the brain. And so what we're really looking to do is to activate all of these different areas of the brain. So we have 3 pillars with universal design for learning. The first is multiple means of engagement. So we're going to talk specifically about that here in a minute. And then we move on to multiple means of representation. This is the what of learning. It's the input. It's how we're taking in the content in which we are trying to learn. And then we have the third piece, multiple means of action and expression. So this is the output. This is the student product that we're looking at. So we're going from engagement to taking in the content to showing what we know. So you can think of it in that progression, and it needs to be that progression. We have to be engaged in our learning before we're actually going to take the time to absorb it. And then we have to have those 2 things going on in order to produce some sort of meaningful work. So let's jump in with multiple means of engagement. Oh, before we do that, here are the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. So UDL came out with guidelines 3.0 last July. So they made CAST. When I say they, CAST is the kind of the creator of UDL. And if you need anything related to UDL, go to cast.org, CAST.org. You will find so much information and research to support every single one of these bullet points. They have done a fantastic job of showing us the science behind every single point in these guidelines. And so they've also taken a lot of time with the creation of the new guidelines to weave in elements of executive function throughout. So really how to use executive functions to engage with the content, how to take it in, and how to create a product, because it's really about that buildup of executive function to creating a goal for ourselves as the learner, following through that goal, and then producing the product. So you can go and find the guidelines. We also have a copy on the Padlet. If you go to cast.org though, which I encourage you to do, you will find that the guidelines are very interactive. So you can click on one section and it'll take you to another area. It'll take you to the research, whatever it is you're looking for. So I do encourage you to kind of check that website if you're able to do that. All right, so if you noticed, as we looked at the previous two slides, whenever we are talking about each pillar, there's a different section of the brain that is highlighted. So multiple means of engagement really digs into that affective network. So that's the network that is associated with like all of our feelings and engagement into something. And so if you think about the hand model of the brain, we have like the brainstem coming up, and then we have everything around our brain that kind of wraps and develops around it. And so our brain kind of develops in this progression of, we have this emotional center that kind of forms first, and then everything else forms around it. And so this is where we get like our reasoning, our ability to actually set that goal and then see the goal through. So that comes from this area right here, that prefrontal cortex that we'll talk about when we get to the action and expression piece. But this connection to learning is such an important piece to keep in mind as we think about getting our learners engaged to learn the content that we want them to learn about. So let's take a little deeper look at the why. So within the guidelines, UDL or CAST has set out certain checkpoints. And so these are great questions that you can ask yourself as you are creating different plans, creating different units. And as you think about how to incorporate UDL into your classroom, think about starting small. So we are going to talk about so many different things today. We're going to talk even within each pillar, there's so much content. It can be very overwhelming. My challenge to you today is to find just that one thing that you can do to make a step toward your classroom to being UDL designed classroom, and the same for your lesson plans and materials. Start small, and then once you get comfortable with one thing, then you can really start to build on that and expand it. So as we look through these checkpoints, all of these questions are meant to ask, how can we get our learner into what they're doing, right? How can we get them engaged? Nikki, will you go back one slide? So we have all these questions, and some of these questions, I think I'll say as a middle-aged adult learner, some of these things that I didn't think about when I first began teaching, because I was very compliant. And so if someone told me to do something, I did it. If someone said something was important, I believed them and took them at their word. Our learners today are so different from that. Technology has really shaped and created our learners a little differently. They're wired differently than what they were even a decade ago, I feel like. So that looking at that first question, is the content relevant to your students? That's really important. Our learners now, and research tells us that they have to have some sort of tie in to the content in order to buy into it. So really looking at, okay, how can we get that content to have some sort of relevance to our learner? And then thinking about the things that Alana mentioned with choice. Can choice be built in? And when we talk about choice, we don't mean unlimited choice. Our brains can really only handle 3 to 4 choices at a time. And I would even think that some of our learners are more of like 2 to 3 choices. So when we say choice, don't think unlimited choice and they've got all of these choices. That is not what we mean. They're structured choices. It's a forced choice. We're just, they're choosing. But they have to find meaning and value in it. But then we're really looking at, do they have the skills necessary to work through a task? And so we'll talk about building that background knowledge in the next pillar. But we need to consider that in the engagement, because we have to get them engaged. And if we jump in with something that's already over their head, then we're probably going to lose that engagement, and we're going to lose that opportunity to take in that new information. And then really looking at having high expectations for all of our students. Those aren't the same high expectations, right? Every learner can achieve a standard at a different rate, at a different like what it's going to look like can be different. And so we want to keep that in consideration as we look through these. We really want to create a learner who is purposeful and reflective as we think about this multiple means of engagement piece. So what are some things we can do in our classroom to add in and build some student choice? Let's take a look at the next slide. Sometimes it can be a choice in seating. And we just know that sometimes our learners, do they need to be at a desk all the time? Probably not. Do they need to be there some of the time? Absolutely. Some situations call for, we're in the desk, we're paying attention, we're in this. But there are other times where maybe we can provide students with choice. Maybe they need a wobble stool, or maybe you have different styles of seats in your classroom, different chairs or benches that they can sit on. One thing to keep in mind too, as we talk about choice, and I think seating is a great example, we have to teach expectations for the choice. So we can't just give our kids, 4 different opportunities of ways to sit in our classroom and say, make a good choice, and then expect them to know what to do. We really have to teach them how to use a wobble stool, or how to use, like a little couch or love seat if you have that in your classroom. We need to set those boundaries for them. Sometimes we can vary our methods for response. Sometimes we could have like a choral response. Sometimes we could have a nonverbal response with like a whiteboard at the student's desk, or using cards or hand signals. That even goes into thinking about how we can like engage them with the output, which I know we're not there yet, but just thinking about, can it be something that you verbally say into a computer that gives you some text to speech, or make a video about something? So we're really thinking about those different ways that we can engage them in responses to get them engaged in the material. Even like a Kahoot, that's a way to engage students through varied methods of response. We need to check for understanding. So we want to think about this before we go into presenting new content, just making sure that they have a foundational understanding if needed before we go into the lesson. And then consider how we're delivering that information. Can learners choose how they're engaging with it at the beginning? Maybe they want to hear it, just like Alana had us thinking about how we learn best. Maybe they want to move and do it. Maybe they need to see it. What options do we have? And sometimes we might only have one, and that's okay. We can just always ask ourselves, next time, could we do better, and think of something else. And if you guys have something to add, please do so to these slides. All right, so some different strategies and methods for engagement. Anything like tic-tac-toe boards. Students love tic-tac-toe boards where you give them many choices. Now, keep in mind, I know I said that our learners need 3 to 4 choices. Tic-tac-toe boards are a little different. You might present them with 6 or 7 different choices, but they have to do like 3 of them, right? They have to get a line somewhere going diagonally, across, up and down. So we can, build in opportunities to maybe repeat a couple of those. But again, tic-tac-toe boards are a little different from just giving choices. Making memes out of things. Can kids show you that they have previous awareness of content or understanding of content in a fun, creative way? This is one option that you could give them. When I would teach vocabulary, and I would try to check for understanding before we jumped into words, because I was like, if everybody in the class knows the meaning of this word, then I don't want to spend a week on it. I would rather move on to a new word to increase vocabulary. So I would do what we called hashtag vocabulary. And so I would say a word, and then the kids could either write, they could put it on a big poster that I had, or they could tell me, or they could write it on a small piece of paper. But I would give them a word like, say, royalty. And then they would either write it or say it like hashtag I'm in charge. or just something, some fun way for them to demonstrate to me that they had an understanding of it. But it was very engaging to them because they thought coming up with hashtags was a fabulous idea. For 7th graders, that worked really well. Younger kids might not understand that, so that strategy might not work for them. And older kids might be way too cool to use a hashtag. So knowing your learners is a big piece of this as well. But giving them choice of tools to write with too, like I mentioned, I had where they could write on the big board, they could write on a small Post-it. Maybe they have whiteboards, which I mentioned in the previous slide. Maybe they can use a pencil, maybe they can use a pen, crayon. There were times I told my students, I don't care what you write with, all I care about is that you write. So if you feel like you need to write with an orange highlighter today, you write with the orange highlighter. Because my goal was just to get them to write. It didn't matter to me what they wrote in. Closed captioning for Google Slides. It's a great option for some of our learners who like to use closed captions and actually see the words. I think in our society today, more than ever, even learners who can hear perfectly fine prefer to see those closed captions, even when watching TV. Yeah, Alana is like, that's me. We just want to have that choice in how we can take in the content. Google Translate also does a nice job for our learners who might not have English as their first language. So it just gives them another option to engage with the content in a language that might be more meaningful to them, but they're still engaging in content that the rest of the class is with. All right, so what's next? Oh, these are just some more tools and strategies that you can use. So these are just options for classroom use. We were just trying to brainstorm some different things that teachers could use. We do want to say, though, that if you have like a Chrome extension or some sort of app that you can download, always be sure to talk to your IT department, make sure that you're good to download apps or to download an extension. The last thing you want to do is, get everyone's access restricted or something crazy like that. So these are just some samples of things that you can do. If you can think of another tool or strategy for engagement or something that you've used, feel free to throw that in the chat. I know I mentioned Kahoots. I think kids love anything like that. Anything that you can do to kind of get them more involved in the content to produce that engagement will be beneficial. And Nikki said that National Archives has some, oh, I lost the chat, old pictures and documents that help with engagement. That is a wonderful suggestion. And Alana said Nearpod. She likes to use Nearpod for videos. It's another great example. So this is a short video that looks at, okay, I want to remove these barriers when looking at engagement, but I don't know how. So this video walks you through some things to think about. The video is based on the standards 2.2, I believe those were the ones right before 3.0. So some of the bullet points might be different. Some of the numberings are a little different as well. And when you look at some of these numbers, when CAST originally released the UDL guidelines, they actually had them in a different order. They had the action and expression first, and so the numbers might look backward, but after more research completed by CAST and a better understanding of the brain, they learned very quickly that, you know what, our learners need to be engaged before we can think about the representation. Do we want to watch the video?
Okay, everyone, so now we're looking at documents that help us drill down to find those barriers and design strategies around them. So first, you need to look at this document and think about, well, what symptoms am I seeing within my instruction, And these symptoms will help me know where I should design. So for example, if you have kids that are asking, when will we ever use this? Then clearly they don't see the relevance of the concept you're trying to teach. And so you need to go to checkpoint 7.2 and think about how you're going to design relevant experiences for the kids. Or maybe let's look down here, and students are focusing too heavily on the wrong facet of an assignment. Meaning maybe they're focusing on like grammar and conventions, and you just want them to write about the life cycle of a butterfly. Your goal is the life cycle of a butterfly. They obviously are not seeing that connection to the goal, and they're running to the conventions, sentence structure when they're writing. So you would need to clearly articulate, well, here's the goal, everybody. Here's what I'm really wanting to see, so that kids know what they should be writing or showing in their assessment. Let's look at one more. Students don't trust you. They don't trust what you are going to say. Obviously, that's going to show that you need to promote expectations and beliefs that would optimize motivation. They need to know that you are trustworthy. You might need to teach them about the idea of growth mindset and follow through with your feedback that you give them that reinforces not only what they need to do differently, but also how you believe that they could do those things differently. So realistically, we just want you to think about what are those symptoms that you're experiencing, and then once you see those symptoms, what do they then mean? How could we use the checkpoints to help us design through them? Thanks a lot, everybody. Okay, everyone.
So that video is on the Padlet, and then the handout that he showed in the video is actually on the Padlet as well. And there's a video for each of the 3 pillars that we talk about today. So how could you increase student engagement? Thinking about increasing opportunities to respond, so keeping them engaged in that content. We know that research tells us we need 3 to 4 opportunities per minute to respond to be able to stay engaged with the content. And that can be a lot of different things. It's not always, having students respond verbally, but it's about having them find things on a page or something like that. Front loading information if they need it. So maybe some of our students might have a bit of a weakness in something, and we know that in order for the engagement piece to happen, we need to front load a little bit of content for them. So how can we do that? How can we activate some of that prior knowledge? One thing I know I always ran into was that we would get to something in English and the kids would be like, I've never seen this before. This is all new to me. And I'm like, now I know that you learned about similes last year, and I know you learned about them the year before. So let's think about it. So really trying to figure out how you can tap into that knowledge that they have, but they're not sure where they filed it at in their brain. Right now, it's just in this filing cabinet that says, I have no clue what this is, but I think I learned it somewhere. So when someone asks me about it, I can't pull it out. So teachers have to get really creative just to pull that information out of students. All right, so let's look at multiple means of representation. And I know we are a little over our halfway point, so I'm going to try to speed up just a little bit because we have some different things to go through at the end. But multiple means of recognition is that how students are taking in that content. This is the what. So this is that big chunk of brain in the middle. So it's forming around that emotional center that we have. So let's take a look at. All right, so the guidelines and checkpoints here. Looking at the first piece that I alluded to in that engagement piece was, do students have relevant background knowledge? Some of our learners may need more background knowledge. I was in a classroom of 2nd graders today, and the teacher was talking about riding on an airplane, and I thought, I wonder how many of these kids have actually been on an airplane. Do they understand the connection that she's trying to make? And most of them, when she asked if they had been on an airplane, almost none of them had. And so we have to build that background for them so that they have an idea of where we're going with that. Consider cultural and language barriers that our learners might have as well. Some of our learners might not experience typical things that we would think that all of our learners have, because maybe they haven't been in the United States long, or maybe they just have a different cultural experience and lens through which they're viewing their education. So making those considerations as well, thinking about the different structures that we have in place to support the content being presented, thinking about those big ideas, themes, generalizations. Are they explained and supported? It's kind of like alluded to in the video. Are the students putting the emphasis on what we want them to put the emphasis on? So when we think about that clear goal, it might be clear to us, but it needs to be clear to the students as well, so that they know what the goal is, so that they're not paying attention to pieces that are not really as relevant. And then can they choose how they're taking in that information? And you know, sometimes when we think about that engagement piece, that transfers into this intake of information as well. And it goes back into how our learners prefer to learn, because we all have those learning preferences. Here, we want to look at being resourceful and authentic as a learner.
I just wanted to add, I also experienced this recently in the classroom as well, Katie, like you had your visit. I had a teacher who said that she's been struggling to teach. She felt like this was the first group who was not into The One and Only Ivan. It was a novel she'd been reading for several years with her students. And she found like this year, this group just isn't, they're not making any connections to it. They're not. And one of the morning meeting kind of questions she asked, she realized that this group, they didn't have a lot of experience with the mall. They hadn't been to a shopping mall, so they couldn't picture all of these wild things that were happening with this gorilla in a shopping mall, because they didn't have the experience of a shopping mall, which, you know, generations of kids previously had. So she definitely did some great work to kind of show them how wild it would be to have a gorilla in a mall, to show them what the mall looked like, you know, and those kinds of things. So it was a great way to make that connection and to really make sure that the words they were taking in from the text made sense in their little brains. So thank you.
I love that. So just thinking about how you present your curriculum and your lessons to your students, we won't share responses. I just really want you to think about this and consider it. I know it's the end of the year, so usually I know towards the end of the year I was ready to be done, but I was also ready for a fresh start. And so over the summer, I would really think about how I could improve my lessons. So I challenge you to consider this. Maybe your brain's not in the right headspace with it being May, but as you work through the rest of May, June, come back July, and really think about this. So just some different principles of representation. We have perception, language, and symbols, and comprehension. So these are all really revolved around that heavy language loaded brain part of our brain, right? It's like that general knowledge part, and it's about having that knowledge, but then being able to comprehend it as well. So then I think we go into the methods. Yes. So we have like a visual reading, right? We can read with our eyes, but what if our learners are blind? They have Braille, right? Or they might have an auditory reading. They might be able to listen to something. Anything like tactile, like the Braille that our learners can use. Again, going back to those captions, if our learners need it. Any sort of accessibility feature, when we think about different accommodations that some of our learners might need to access the curriculum, because UDL is about removing those barriers and promoting that accessibility. So we can even think about this when we prepare different training materials, but lesson materials we might give to our students. But if we're coming up with PowerPoints and being very aware of our learners and knowing we don't want to contrast similar colors, to be sure we're using like black and white or dark blue and white, or something that is going to be easily distinguishable for our learners from that visual standpoint. Using big enough font so that our learners can see things. even materials that we print out. Desmos does also have a calculator that is accessible. So that's a really cool feature if you teach math classes and you need something like that. They do have that offer. So here's the video for removing barriers of representation. I think for time's sake, we'll skip this one. You kind of got the idea from the first video of, just what these pages would show. And these are one-page documents, so super handy.
And these videos are on the Padlet for you to watch as well. So if you are at home thinking, well, I don't see the URL on there so that I can go to this link, it's in the Padlet and there for you.
All right, so action and expression. So this is the prefrontal cortex. This is the how of learning. It's the output. For some of our learners, they don't get to this output for a lot of different reasons. And this is so important because this is the learner's opportunity for them to show us, the teacher, what they know. Because we have these goals, we have these standards, now we need to be sure that the students can meet them or have met them. So let's take a look at action and expression. So when we think about our learners, we really have to consider their executive function levels. We need to consider their grade and age as well, because we have different things that are going to be developmentally appropriate throughout our pre-K through 12 learners. So examining and asking ourselves, do they have the necessary tools for physical access and response? So that's important, right? They have to physically be able to get them, whether they be things that they need in their hands, maybe it's something electronic. Can they get it? And then do they have choice in the way they respond? So this is a really important thing to consider. Most of the time, I always felt like as a teacher, I had ways that I thought students should respond. And so I would request that that's how they turn their work in. But we have these firm goals, right? But we have flexible ways of getting there. And so as I reflected back, I would ask myself, does it really matter if they write this or if they tell me? Like, can I still give them credit? And so I would look back at the goal and say, okay, well, what was my learning goal? Well, it was that they could tell me or create a simile on their own. And so did it matter if they wrote it or if they told me? Well, not according to my goal. My goal was just that they could do it. So thinking about things like that, because sometimes getting that information from the brain onto paper is a challenge for a kid. So I want to remove that barrier of having to get it out on the paper. And if they can get it out verbally, they've still met the goal. Now, sometimes our standards are very firm. If they have to write a 5-page or a 5-paragraph essay, then they need to write a 5-paragraph essay. Probably can't get away with doing that in like a presentation style format because the state standard says that we have to write it. So there are times when we can't always give opportunities, but a lot of times we can. And then really looking at that executive function support piece, this is where a lot of our learners stumble because maybe they don't have that ability to get thoughts on paper. Maybe they don't have that understanding of how to get started. Oftentimes we look at kids and say, well, you're just procrastinating or you're putting it off. Well, procrastination is actually an executive dysfunction. It's an inability to get started because you're not sure where to start. And so it's not making that deliberate choice, but it's making, it's just trying to figure out how to provide them access to get to that. And Niki makes a really, or I'm sorry, it was Alana, makes a really great point with writing that even though our standard might say to write it, they might have some choice, maybe using like text to speech and then write it or a word stem or starter. So I love that suggestion. Thank you so much, Alana. And then we also want to look at, can our students set goals? Well, I don't know. Can most adults set goals? We need help with that sometimes, right? So when we think about setting them, we've got a plan for them. Well, we probably need to be taught how to create a plan, and then how to monitor our own progress. So as we think about our lessons, how can we build those pieces into the lesson for our learners? And we've got a whole series on, executive functions and thinking about helping our students with those and developing skills for them. So keep that in mind if you ever want that. But really, in this pillar, we're looking to create learners who are strategic so they can come up with their own strategies and action-oriented. So they come up with their strategies, but then they can follow through on them, and they know how to set up a plan to follow through. So physical action, expression and communication, and executive functions are the three big areas that we're looking at when we think about action and expression. So getting the access, being able to communicate all of the information, and then having the executive function to actually turn in the assignment. And a lot of our learners, they might do it, but then they forget to turn it in. I've seen a lot of messy backpacks, lockers, folders. These are some different tools and strategies for action and expression. Also, there's an executive function Padlet on our website that you can, at iepta.org, that you can find that has a ton of other resources related to action and expression with executive function. But these are just some examples that you could use in your classroom. Visual timers are not on this list, but those are a really great thing for like monitoring a student progress or teaching them how to monitor their own progress, so that self-monitor piece. Again, if you want to try to download anything for your classroom, please be sure that you're checking with your IT department to make sure that you're going to be compliant with the standards set forth by the corporation that you are in. Okay, so this is a video, and I want us to watch this video because it's only like 25 seconds. And this is probably one of my favorite videos that we show. But I want you to think about what we've talked about. And I really want you to look at asking yourself if the learner, Nola is her name, if she is engaged in what she's doing. Does she understand? So looking at that middle tier. And then when we look at the action and expression, the follow through and coming up with a goal and following through on it, does she do that? So let's take a listen and look.
Hi, my name is Nola Thompson. Today, our thing is division. Our division problem is 9 divided by 3. 9 minus 3 equals 6. 6 minus 3 equals 3. 3 minus 3 equals 0. How many times did you subtract 3? 3 times. So 9 divided by 3 equals 3. We got it.
All right, so when I watch that video, the things I think about are, first, does she understand the concept of division? And the answer is yes. She is able to explain it and to teach it. So that is like the highest level of understanding content, if you can teach it to someone else. So she has mastered the skill. But when I think about, is she engaged in what she's doing? I would say 100% yes. She is so excited for herself when she finishes this video, first of all. And I love that she claps for herself. But also I look at the filter that she has used. She's put some thought into this. She was into this. She was engaged in this piece of technology that she was using for the assignment. Now, could her teacher have given her a page of 25 division facts to show that she understands division? Yes. Would it have been as meaningful? Probably not. So I just love this video. And for the person viewing it, I love that I have the sound so I can hear her cute little voice, but then the closed captions are there too. So I can see it, I can hear it, and it just makes for a great experience for both of us.
Hi.
So here's the video for action and expression, and a reminder, it is on the Padlet as well as the handout. So I think that takes us to Nikki, I believe. Oh, the last thing. This is just an overall UDL barrier flow chart. So it's like a 2-minute video, and then there's the handout that goes with it that talks about if your learners are struggling in one area, you know, like, do they have the background knowledge? Yes. Okay, then here's what you need to do. If not, here's what you need to do. So it's just a great fun flow chart.
Yeah, and Katie, I think we actually have time for this one. It's a pretty short one.
Oh, it is. Okay.
And I know that some of our interactive pieces may go a little faster in the next few
Okay.
activities that we have
Sure.
planned. So maybe we'll make time for this video if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Hey everyone, wanted to give you an idea of how this UDL barrier ID flowchart works. So whenever you're designing instruction, you can predict the areas where you're going to lose kids, or you can think of like the needs of an individual learner, and you might want to like evaluate which parts of the instruction or which places in instruction they're falling away or they're not understanding. So the process for this is, first you want to ask yourself, do these kids care, or does the student care? Are they motivated to learn? If the answer is no, they don't care, they're not interested in the concept you're trying to teach them, then providing multiple means of engagement will support them and help them engage back in with the learning. And this form is to help direct you in where to go. There are other forms that we'll provide that show you how to drill deeper into providing multiple means of engagement. So let's say they are engaged. Yes, they're interested in learning. They like this subject. Then you want to jump down to the next question. Do the students understand the concept? Are they getting those key vocabulary? Do they have a good global conceptual understanding of whatever it is you're trying to teach? The way that you would think about this is, well, can they show me informally that they are getting bits and pieces of what I'm trying to teach? Can they use their voice? Can they draw it? Can they map it out? Can they answer a multiple choice question as a more simple question? If the answer is no here, then that's giving you evidence that they need other representations of that concept. They need to perceive it in different ways. You need to teach it to them in ways that they understand it. If the answer is yes, they do show some basic understanding, then you want to move to this next question. Is the student able to show their understanding in the way the teacher wants them to show it? Meaning, okay, so the kid can show me with their voice, or they can show me if they draw out some sort of diagram, but when it comes to the way that I need them to show me, like eventually we need to get to the ability to write, then they fall apart. The answer being no. Now we might need to go down here and provide multiple means of action expression. If the goal is specific to writing, then we're going to need to provide them tools, strategies, and support for how to accomplish that goal. We can build those looking here. If the goal isn't related to writing, maybe we give them a different way to show their understanding, a different way to meet competency, so that they can still meet the competency expectations we're setting for them, just in the way that might be a little bit different than the initial way we asked. If it's yes, then obviously we're in a cycle where the kids are meeting the goal. They're doing all the things that we're trying to get them to do, so we should find some barriers in other places that we can design around. Hopefully this is a helpful chart. The last thing I'd add is what we're going to provide is specific forms or graphic organizers that help you drill down to each of these areas, and so those are going to be coming.
All right, so just thinking about too, as I was kind of watching that, and I was thinking about just adult learners and how adults prefer to learn. There's a whole learning theory about how adults like to learn and how we learn best. And if you're watching this on a recording, you have ways to reduce the barriers that you might encounter when watching this. You might just strictly listen to it. You might watch it and have the closed captions on, because we'll have that opportunity for you. But you might also be someone who thinks, oh, they are talking so slow for me. I want to speed up the pace a little bit. You have all of those options, and that's just how you're taking in the information. You know, we like to have some autonomy over our learning, and our students are the same way. And so I just want to challenge you to think about, how can you give them some of that autonomy back? Because we know that when we have choices and we can own our learning, then it's going to be so much more meaningful, whether we're a kindergartner or a 46-year-old.
Absolutely.
Hey,
And oh, sorry, I'm going to take over for Katie. I want to add too from that flow chart that, this just really matters for all of our students all of the time. Even if sometimes I feel like when we work with teachers, they get really obsessed with, well, how do we do UDL if on the test I know for sure they're going to have to write a 5 paragraph essay, or I know for sure they're going to have to write. So, kind of what's the point of all of this? But what we know about our students and that executive functioning piece, it is engaging for them to be able to know that they understand the skill. So if you're working on, say, argumentative writing, and the students realize that in their speech or in their comic strips they draw or in a video they make, they're able to form an argument, we're winning because that is one piece of the skill. Yes, are they still going to, on that state test, struggle? The writing pieces, are going to be difficult, but it means that we're giving them at least part of the skills that they need, and those writing skills can keep coming and keep working as they go on. What this does is this prepares them for the life of it, right? So not so much for that exact test, but in life, they'll know writing is difficult for me, so I need to try it this way first. Maybe I can make a video of myself outlining my argument for my presentation at work, and then from there work with the transcript. And so we're giving them skills that will serve them as lifelong learners and lifelong, humans who are successful in the world as well. So um, removing those barriers might not be the magic wand that we need, exactly for the unit test on Friday or for the end of that day, or even our big state exams, but it's going to be something that builds those scaffolds and small steps for success for all of our learners. So let's take a few minutes and just practice the ideas of this. This is from that first video. The lesson objective was identify the life cycle stages of a butterfly. So the teacher's goal for this particular lesson is all about, can the students identify the life cycle stages of this butterfly? So when we look at it, the original lesson goes back to, we want you to, study those life cycle stages of the butterfly, and then write a 5 paragraph summary of the life cycle. So we're asking our students to write. I'd like for you to take a moment here and just think about, what are the barriers to that kind of assignment? Where are those kind of red flags? I know I'm picturing in my mind that this particular student will struggle with that, or that student I'm thinking of will struggle with that. The second piece of this, the materials students will have to be successful on this assignment. They'll have their science book as a reference. They'll have their worksheets that go along with it, and they'll have drawing paper, pencils, markers. They'll have all of those kinds of things that they need. So those are some materials that are available for them. So if you stop to consider barriers that exist both in the assignment itself, how we're asking students to show their knowledge, as well as in the materials we're giving them to access content and to engage with it, we know that some barriers exist for all students. So even our students who are high ability, who love learning, who are engaged in learning all the time, who might face few struggles, this is still an opportunity to consider them when you're looking at UDL as well. So when you consider barriers of that 5 paragraph summary of the butterfly, think about the ways that this particular assignment is a little disconnected from the lesson objective. So we're asking students to identify the life cycle stages of a butterfly, but in that original lesson, we ask them to write a 5 paragraph summary of it. Those two things are disconnected because our students who might have writing as a barrier are going to struggle with the writing piece of it. So the writing skills might get in the way of what they know about the life cycle stages of a butterfly. We also have students who may have executive functioning concerns where walking all the way through the 5 stages might be too much. We might need to provide support in the form of a graphic organizer or other scaffold because the 5 steps with all of that information might be too much. The same is true for perhaps some of our high ability students. Maybe these students have already learned those life cycle stages of a butterfly and they're ready to engage with additional content or find a different way, a different lens of viewing the content. And writing a summary of it, a simple summary, doesn't actually provide them any opportunity to go above and beyond in those areas. So what we can do is we can remove barriers in a number of different ways. We can change the how this what the representation is for our students. We can look at how is the content presented to our students, that representation piece. Um, we have to ask them, how do they learn or how are they going to learn the information and how are they going to show me what they learn? Can we change up how they show what they've learned through that 5 paragraph summary? Could it instead be a comic strip? Could it instead be through a graphic organizer? Could they be, as Alana mentioned earlier, cutting things out of magazines or out of old textbooks and things to be able to show those different pieces, or maybe even create something like a slideshow or a video, things that will help them to show that life cycle and the stages, but not necessarily in a fully written piece. Also considering for your students, maybe a few words are good for them, but maybe writing in those full complete sentences is one of those barriers. So deciding at what level we want to include of writing. I know a lot of students who feel empowered when they have the opportunity to create a slideshow with bullet points instead of complete sentences of a paragraph. So those are some options there as well. Other things to consider are the barriers in the materials. My colleagues have gone through quite specifically ways that we can include things like closed captioning, where we have the option of changing the speed of the speaker by taking the textbook and turning it into an audio experience, or perhaps even a video experience through the use of supporting AV materials on YouTube or other sites that allow our students to dig into the content in a different way or in a more supported manner. We also have different materials that they could use. Perhaps that drawing paper, pencils, and markers is accessible for some students, but others prefer the use of digital. I have an older daughter who really dislikes drawing. Anytime she's asked to draw something, it is just a complete turn off for her. This would be a barrier. She would not feel like she could show everything she knew about about that life cycle stages without having, with having to draw it. It would just be a barrier for her. Alana or Katie, do you have anything to add here? Any other thoughts that I've missed? I know we've got a long list here. I think I hit them all.
I think you did.
Okay, thank you. I know usually we'd love to get interaction during this point where we can get ideas from our colleagues, those of you joining us as well. So if you think of other things, please feel free to share it with any of us at the TA Center and we can get those ideas added to our Padlet as well.
Yeah, I think it's just a good framework to have to use your lesson plans and to just think about what your original lesson is and just think out the barriers and how can you redesign it. So this is kind of just what you always think about. So whatever learning objective works with this, and just having this slide is probably going to be helpful for you if you want to plan some UDL. And we also talk, and I always like to say that if you're trying UDL, you could just try one lesson just to see if it works. Like, because sometimes it's overwhelming. Like Katie said, there's a lot of information. So if you just try one class period that you think that you can do something like this in, one lesson, and just see how it goes, that might be where you start. You just start like UDL Thursdays and talk about that, and then maybe just try it one period. So that was just my little take from the teachers that I've talked to that are trying to do this. They do it in very small chunks. They don't try to do every lesson plan and all the things all at once. Sorry, Nick.
No, that's okay. It's kind of the never-ending cycle of it, right? Because as soon as even if you choose some aspects of UDL, you'll probably find the next year with a new group of students that you see another spot where you could add one more thing. Or so don't be afraid of taking it in small chunks and reducing that burnout for you as the teacher. Yeah, great point, Alana. All right, so I do have one last activity to wrap us up today, and that's a quick video from a local classroom that we're going to show. And I really want you to spend some time thinking about ways that this teacher is meeting the needs of all learners. So we've had this time to talk in detail about UDL. How is this particular teacher addressing each aspect of universal design for learning and meeting the needs of her students in this brief video?
That is an opinion, but Daniel gets to share his.
I'm a word person. I feel great when we're all reading and discussing and writing papers. That feels super comfortable to me. But it's not successful for all my students, so I need to disrupt that for myself.
Now, right before we sample it, Mick, tell everybody what is it that you need to be able to do by the end of class today?
I can describe the process of milk turning into yogurt through fermentation.
Okay. Here is a job that I need. I need every person in this room to get a plastic cup.
Within any single day, you'll have a variety of access points for the content. And I do find that it deepens engagement for gen ed kids, for special education kids, for all different kinds of students, because there's more to do. Like, we got to keep it moving. Otherwise, it gets really boring. So it's trying to find a way where there's something that's video, where there's something that's audio, where there's something that's visual, where there's something that's read. It is about that many paths, many, many paths.
Floating around. Nobody's connected to anybody else. Floating around. We're floating around. Now make 1 milk protein. 1 milk protein.
I really learned how important it was to introduce more visual cues for my students who are English language learners, where you do an action related to vocabulary or related to a concept.
We're going to stretch out, stretch out.
The learning gains that I saw for my ELL learners were so huge when I started to disrupt a purely language-based and word-based type of instruction.
But what do I want now? Connect. Connect. Connect.
It matters less to me how we arrive somewhere. What matters to me is that a student develops the conceptual understanding around something.
Get tiny, get tight, get small. You're a tiny, tight little milk protein.
I just saw my students really be able to shine. It was beautiful to watch.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop it there and just comment on some of the things that I noticed in the video, ways this teacher was meeting the needs of her students. Think of all of the great things you saw in there. Not only did she continue with what she said, her word-based, her language-based instructional model, you saw that she had the slides with the language and words supporting everything that she was saying. Also, she was writing on that whiteboard. She was continuing to support with language and words, but also she was having the students make motion. They were doing the motions to go along with the learning movement. We saw opportunities for the students to write, to draw, and even to experiment with some of the yogurt in that. This was a very short clip of this longer lesson, but those are some things to keep in mind. This teacher was really looking at all of the ways the students could respond and could interact with the new content and could really show what they know. She was probably able to learn so much from that formative assessment of how many students knew when she said find another milk protein, how they were able to connect to each other, what that meant, and she was able to model it in multiple ways. So we look through it, we see throughout this video that she was able to remove so many barriers for her students by offering all of these different opportunities. And many of them didn't look like they took too much planning, right? It was just a quick thought of how can I remove the barrier of language and make this a little more interactive or a little more moving happening during the lesson. So thank you for keeping an eye on that one. So one of the things we want to really encourage you to do as you wrap up today, as you watch this video, is to really think about how you can reflect on this and what small chunk you can take into the next part of your teaching and learning in your own classroom. So as Alana said, we don't expect everything to be different tomorrow in your classroom, but what's one thing, what's one unit or one lesson where you're really picturing, I think that this is something that I could stretch a little bit and try something different, we want you to pick that one spot. Maybe it is that you're using the slide template that we showed, how you look at your lesson plans so that you identify barriers and come up with a way to make some changes to instruction and an assessment in order to meet the needs of all students. Maybe you're thinking about the lessons and the successes that you have had. I remember when I did this, it was so successful for my students. Ask yourself what was so successful and why, and then see if you can use that in other areas of UDL in the future. And really reflect on why some things work better than others. And as a teacher, I always think, and why it worked so well last year and maybe not quite as well this year, or vice versa, because we know that as our students change and their needs change each year, we might find that we have to go back to something old or try something new, even when something went really well in the previous years. So take the time to reflect on some of those things and know that here at the TA Center, we are here to support you. We have a variety of different resources. We've included some of our favorites here in this slideshow, but also you are always welcome to check out our website, iepta.org, which offers a learning center that has a variety of the Padlets that Katie was referring to earlier, and we're there to support you as well. So thank you again for training with us today, and we look forward to seeing you again in a future training. Thank you.